It weighs 3.5 kilograms, less than a bag of sugar and a bottle of wine combined. It is 81.4 centimeters long, about the length of a man's arm from shoulder to fingertip. The case is 1 millimeter of pressed steel, welded along a single seam, so thin that a technician at Farnborough could flex it slightly between finger and thumb. Inside, 520 grams of hexogen. By June 1945, the RAE structures and mechanical engineering flight had captured aircraft, engines, cannons, radar sets, entire crated Luftwaffe research programs. But this object, sitting on a workbench in a hangar in Hampshire, is the one that makes an engineer named Morian Morgan put down his tea and pick up a magnifying glass. Because when they open the tail section, they find that the fin folds along a hinge with a tolerance so loose it should never work. It works better than anything the Allies have built. This is the R4M. The Germans called it Orkan, Hurricane. 6 Messerschmitts fitted with it broke a bomber formation over Rathenau in 3 minutes flat on the 18th of March 1945. The RAE didn't get their hands on an intact one until after the surrender at Fassberg 2 months later, when Me-262s of Jagdgeschwader 7 flew in and gave themselves up to 616 Squadron. What the engineers find inside changes how every air force on Earth builds rockets for the next 30 years. Farnborough, Hampshire, October 1945. The hangar smells of engine oil and cold tea. On the bench, one crate, stenciled in German, containing 4 R4M rockets and a section of wooden launch rail recovered from the wreckage yard at Fassberg, where the surrendered 262s had been stripped for study. Wing Commander Handel Davies signs the object in himself. He spent the war on high-speed aerodynamics, wind tunnels, compressibility, the physics of air behaving badly at 400 miles an hour. He picks up the first rocket. It's lighter than he expects. He says so, out loud, to the room. They weigh it properly, on a laboratory balance, not a field scale. 3.5 kilograms, confirmed. Length, 81.4 centimeters. Diameter, 55 millimeters, the number that gives it its Army designation. Davies writes it down and underlines the weight twice. Here's why that number stops him. The rocket the Allies use against German bombers, and the one the Luftwaffe used before this, is the Werfer Granit 21, a tube-launched projectile weighing well over 100 kilograms per unit and dragging enough wind resistance to slow the launching aircraft by nearly 50 kilometers an hour. This thing weighs a 30th of that, and it's meant to do the same job, kill a 4-engine bomber in one hit. If you're the kind of person who reads a rocket's dimensions twice before believing them, you're in the right place. This channel exists for people who want the real engineering behind the war, not the highlight reel. Subscribe, and every Tuesday you get another object, another report, another moment when someone in a cold hangar realized the war had just changed shape. They removed the tail assembly. This is where it gets strange. The fins, 8 thin steel blades, aren't fixed. They're hinged, folded flat against the rocket body, held shut by nothing more than the pressure of the launch rail itself. Squadron leader Peter Lawrence, an armaments specialist seconded from Boscombe Down, runs his thumb along the hinge and feels the fin swing loose. He checks the tolerance with a feeler gauge. It's sloppy, genuinely sloppy, by British manufacturing standards. A joint this loose, on a British-made component, would have failed inspection. 200 miles away, over the Ruhr that same week in October, RAF Bomber Command is still flying reconnaissance sorties to map what's left of German industry. The war in Europe has been over 5 months. The war to understand what just happened to it is still running at full speed. They fire one. Not in the air, on a static test rig, rocket clamped, high-speed camera running at Farnborough's photographic range. The fins, folded flat a half-second before, snap outward the instant the rocket leaves the rail. Lawrence watches the film back 3 times. In his report, he writes that the deployment is positive and repeatable. High praise from a man not given to enthusiasm on paper. What they've found is that the fin doesn't fold and lock with engineered precision. It folds loose, and centrifugal and aerodynamic force alone snap it open and hold it there once the rocket is spinning and moving through the air. The looseness isn't a manufacturing shortcut. It's the design. This is where Davies puts his pencil down. Because everything the RAE has been taught about rocket stabilization says fins need rigid, fixed mounting, or the rocket tumbles. Every British and American design follows that rule. The Germans have built a rocket that stabilizes itself precisely because the tolerance is loose. The looser hinge lets the fin swing fully open under load, then the airflow itself holds it rigid. Tighter mounting, they realize, would have made it worse, not better. Someone in the hangar, the report doesn't name him, just calls him the fitter, has been holding a folded fin open with his fingers, feeling how little force it takes. He lets it snap back shut, then open again. He does this 4 or 5 times before anyone tells him to stop playing with government property. They cut one open. Inside the Warhead casing, 520 grams of hexogen, a high explosive more powerful, gram for gram, than the TNT and Amatol mixtures the Allies favour for anti-aircraft munitions. The casing itself is the thin press steel, 1 millimetre, that Morgan had flexed with his fingers on day 1. Lawrence's report notes something specific. The shell is thin enough, and the charge powerful enough, that a single hit anywhere on a bomber's structure is calculated to bring it down. Not a lucky hit on a fuel tank. Any hit. In the last months of daylight bombing over Germany, American 8th Air Force crews had started reporting bombers disintegrating from single explosions with no obvious cause, no fire trail, no fighter attack run they could identify in the confusion. Some crews blamed flak, some blamed sabotage. Nobody, until this bench in Farnborough had the number. 520 grams in a case 1 millimetre thick. Doing that. They weigh the launch rail. 21 kilograms, wood and steel, designed to carry 12 rockets under each wing. 24 in total on a fully loaded Me-262. Lawrence calculates the total added weight and drag penalty to the aircraft. 16 kilometers an hour. That's the entire speed cost to a jet fighter for carrying 24 rockets capable of downing 24 bombers in a single pass. Davies does the comparison himself on the same page of his notebook. A single Werfer Granite 21 rocket, the older design, cost the aircraft carrying it almost the same speed penalty for 1 rocket, not 24. The Germans hadn't just built a better warhead. They'd solved the drag problem that had made rocket-armed fighters slow and vulnerable for the entire war. Davies sits back. He doesn't say anything for a while. The report notes, dryly, a pause in proceedings before the team moves to the final component. They trace the ignition system. The R4M isn't fired electrically from a cockpit switch in the way Allied wing-mounted rockets are wired. It uses a simplified system that the pilot triggers as a salvo, a spread of rockets released together, not aimed individually, designed for a pilot with perhaps 2 seconds of firing time, before he's already flashed past the bomber formation at over 500 miles an hour in a jet. This is the detail that makes Lawrence write the sentence that ends up quoted in the RAE's final assessment. The R4M was not built to be accurate. It was built to be numerous, cheap, and lethal on any hit, because the aircraft carrying it moves too fast for a pilot to aim a single shot. The Germans had designed a weapon around the failure of their own delivery platform, a jet too fast for its pilots to hit anything with precision, and made that failure irrelevant by saturating the sky instead. On the 18th of March 1945, 6 Me-262s carrying these rockets attacked a formation of nearly 1,200 American bombers escorted by over 400 fighters. They fired 144 rockets in a single pass. Pilots on both sides reported the same thing afterward. Debris in the air, wings, engine cowlings, cockpit sections, falling separately from the aircraft they had been part of seconds earlier. 6 aircraft. 144 rockets. That's the number sitting behind the object on Davies's bench. Someone on the team, cross-referencing captured German production documents alongside the physical object, notices the manufacturing date stamped inside the casing of one rocket. Early 1945. The R4M had been in mass production for barely 2 months before the war ended. Davies writes the sentence that becomes the spine of the whole report. Had this weapon reached squadrons 18 months earlier, alongside the jet that carried it, the calculation of daylight strategic bombing over Germany, the number of aircraft it cost, the number of crews, the entire arithmetic of the air war would have been different. The fitter who'd been playing with the folding fin picks it up one more time before it goes into storage. He asks Lawrence, half joking, why nobody on the British side thought of this first. Lawrence doesn't have an answer. He writes the question down anyway. It's in the file. Here's the shape of what they'd actually found, laid out plainly. A rocket a fraction of the weight of anything comparable. A folding fin that worked better loose than tight, inverting an assumption every Allied designer held as fact. A warhead thin enough to flex by hand, carrying enough hexagon to kill a 4-engine bomber with one strike anywhere on the airframe. A firing doctrine built not around a skilled marksman, but around the certainty that a jet moving at 500 miles an hour didn't need one. It wasn't the explosive. It wasn't the fin. It was the order they'd built it in. Every Allied rocket program started with the platform, the aircraft, and designed the weapon to fit around it. The Germans, forced by resource shortages and a jet fighter arriving faster than doctrine could keep pace with, had done the opposite. They built the weapon around the pilot's real, measured limitation, no time to aim, and only then fit it to the aircraft. That's the reversal. Weapon before doctrine. Failure designed for, not around. The consequence lands within a year. The RAE's report on the R4M's folding fin stabilization and its salvo fire doctrine feeds directly into post-war British and American rocket design. The American Mark IV folding fin aerial rocket, the Mighty Mouse, used from Korea through Vietnam and beyond, takes its folding fin principle straight from this bench in Farnborough. Half the number of fins the R4M used, but the same idea. Fold flat for carriage, spring open on release. Let the airflow do the locking. Millions of rockets built on that inverted German logic. Fired from Sabres, from Phantoms, from helicopter gunships 2 decades after Davies first flexed a 1mm steel casing between his fingers and wrote the weight down twice. And the R4M's saturation fire doctrine, build for volume, not precision, because the platform is too fast for the pilot, becomes the foundation for every unguided air-to-air rocket pod fitted to jet fighters for the next generation. The Luftwaffe fired their entire war-winning ambition through 6 aircraft on one afternoon in March 1945, 8 weeks before the surrender. The RAE spent the next 6 months proving they were right about how to build the weapon, and wrong about almost everything else. Today, An R4M sits in a case at the National Air and Space Museum, folding fins locked open behind glass, next to a placard giving its weight in ounces and its explosive charge in grams. Numbers a visitor reads in 4 seconds and walks past. Others sit in the Imperial War Museum's reserve collection, a few miles from the Farnborough hangar where Davies first picked one up. Most people who stop at that case for a moment see a rocket. What they don't see is the fitter's hands, opening and closing a loose steel hinge 4 or 5 times because he couldn't quite believe how little it took to make it work. And the report, filed weeks later, that told 2 air forces to stop building fins tight and start building them loose. The war ended in May. The argument about how to build a rocket properly was still being settled in October on a workbench in Hampshire, by men taking a 3.5-kilogram object more seriously than the empire that built it ever had reason to expect.